Hi there, welcome to the WhistlePig Workshop. Today we are going to build the FF13 Catbird Mark II. This is our improved version of our Catapult launch glider. We've changed the tail a little bit, dihedral angles, and we've improved the instructions. We struggle really hard to make your instructions as useful as possible. And the very first thing we're going to suggest to you is read them. There's a lot of instructions here. This is 10 pages. 10 pages of instructions to this plane, and you're thinking to yourself, this is a really simple airplane. Why does it need 10 pages? Well, the answer is really easy. We assume that you've never built one of these before. Now, if you have, this is going to be a breeze. You don't even need to read these instructions. You probably can figure it out just by looking at the airplane. But we know that some people have never had the joy of building a model airplane from scratch, cutting an airfoil, sanding it to shape, getting it balanced, teaching it to fly, so to speak. And we want you to do that. And we don't want you to miss any steps. We don't want it to be difficult or hard. So we did our best to make it very clear, very simple, very step-by-step. So these instructions are long, but they are, to the best of our ability, accurate and correct. And we hope that when you're done, you will have learned a lot. And next time you build one of these, it'll go really quickly. So after you read the instructions, the first thing you're going to want to do is locate all the parts. Now, this airplane comes in 3 sheets. There's a fuselage sheet. I've already punched this one out. A tail sheet, which shows the horizontal and vertical tail, and a hook doubler, which we'll get to in a moment. And the wing sheet, which you can't see. We'll try and fix that for you. There we go. All right. We're better at airplanes than we are at videos, aren't we? All right. So this is the wing sheet, and it contains the wing itself. Oops, some parts already popped out of here. The angle braces, the tail, tail alignment guide, and the 2 airfoil templates. It takes some time for glue to dry in some parts of this. We will be using several different kinds of glue, including plain old Elmer's glue and various kinds of super glues. We're going to use super glue because in a lot of ways it works better and it's faster. You don't have to, but the Elmer's glue works best. We're also going to run a stopwatch starting now, so you know how long it takes to build one of these. And if we edit this down, you'll always see that stopwatch hiding up there in the corner, so you know how long it really took to build this, because the wonderful thing about videos is you can always make time look like it went by a little bit funny. So the other things we're going to need are sandpaper. We've already made up a sanding block, actually 2 sanding blocks. You can just glue sandpaper to any square usable piece of wood like this. In this particular case, we want one that doesn't have sandpaper on the edge, because we're going to be sanding against the table and we don't want to sand our table. Again, Elmer's glue, super glue works like that. If you have spray cement, that also works really well for making sanding blocks. If you're going to want a hobby knife, these are all laser cut, so they punch out of here nicely, but sometimes it's nice to have a knife to make small adjustments. And a razor saw, which I don't have on the table. Pardon my noise. This is a razor saw. This is kind of a specialized tool, but you can get them at woodworking stores and hardware stores as well. X-Acto makes them. There's a company called Zona that makes a Zona saw, which is even fancier, but it's really just the same thing. It's a fine-tooth saw blade. If you're not used to working with sharp things, of course, we recommend that you get some help from somebody who is. Be careful, because we don't want you to cut yourself. We'll get back to these later. We're also going to want a few pins. Ordinary dressmaker's pins work well for the task at hand. And we're going to be doing a lot of sanding, so it's a good idea to have a dust mask on, or some kind of dust collection system, just so you're not breathing that stuff in. It's just not really good. It's not poisonous, but it doesn't feel good. And of course, you want a flat surface that you can work on. You've protected it with wax paper so glue doesn't stick to it. Now, first things first, this is an airplane, and airplanes are sensitive to weight. The weight of an airplane directly affects how well it flies, and so you're going to want to consider, am I going to paint this airplane? Am I going to sand it? Am I going to finish it? Generally speaking, we recommend against sanding and finishing airplanes like these, or against finishing them with too much paint, because that adds weight. But we're going to say for this case, this is an outdoor flying airplane that can get damp if it's winter or whatever. So a mild amount of sealing is a good idea, just so that when it gets wet, it wants to warp, which changes how it flies. Sanding, of course, is really important because that helps to reduce weight. And I'll give you an example as we go along here. We're going to keep track of this. I'm going to punch the wing out, which, because it's laser cut, works nicely. And we've got a little digital scale here. You can get these lots of different places. I got this at an electronic supply house. Kitchen scale works okay, but you really want tenths of a gram for this kind of an airplane. See all my spare parts. We'll clear the scale. No grams. So this is the wing, just as it is. 7.5 grams. Okay. We're gonna, as we go along, we will shape this wing and we'll start taking weight off of it. So we're gonna make a note to start. Wing, stage 1, 7.5 grams. We might as well do the tail feathers and the fuselage while we're at it. Here's the fuselage. Fuselage weighs 1.5 grams. And we'll punch out the tail feathers. Here's where the hobby knife comes in a little bit handy. Whenever you have to go against the grain a little bit, the hobby knife makes it come out just that much easier. This one's with the grain, so you can see it just slips right out of there. But back in the old days, of course, these were either just printed on the wood and you had to cut them all the way out, or they were stamped out of the wood. In fact, I think we're going to re-clear this. 0.5 gram for both of those together. So that's 8.5, sorry, 7.5, 8, 8.5, 9.5 grams to start. Did I get that right? 8, 9.5. Yep. So that's pretty light to begin with. This airplane's looking good. All these planes are slightly different because the wood's slightly different. We try to give you the best wood that we can, but it always pays to reduce weight as you go. Okay, we'll bring that back later. And something we're going to need later also is this sanding template. And you make one of these by punching out your wing template here. Take this part off. This is useful later if you need to check a gauge. And we will be using these as we go along to check how our airfoil is doing. You see right now it's flat and the airfoil isn't, and so that's not going to work. What we're going to want to do is put a little bit of sandpaper on here. And I need to get just a little bit of sandpaper out of my collection of sandpaper. One thing you get in time in life is a certain amount of extra stuff lying around. So we're just going to tear off a little strip of this. Hardware store sandpaper, you can often get it just at your local store. And we're going to glue that on here, and then we'll trim it later. And rather than use spray glue because that's messy, I'm actually going to use some tacky glue because it's a little bit tackier. That one's not open. Let's try the one that's open. There we go. And the trick to any of these glues like this is just use the minimum necessary, because the more there is, the longer it takes for it to dry, because they're kind of water-based, and that just takes forever. So we'll let this tack up for a second. Always read the instructions, right? Dries and tacks up faster than average craft glues. And we'll see how well that works. Not super tacky yet. Gotta say, spray glue is really an optimal solution for this. secret is patience. Let's let that tack up a little bit while we're talking about other things. All right. So because we have all these things that are, it's going to take a while to shape this wing. So we want to get ahead of the game and build up some of the other things that we need to do and let these go. Now, because these are so light, I'm not going to shape these too much. I'm just going to take the sanding block, knock these tabs off, just to make them like this. The leading edges square actually works fine on these. You can, if you want to, and I'll just demonstrate this really quickly. Just use the edge of this, and we'll just take a little bit of material off of here towards the trailing edge, just to thin those out a little bit, because the material is so light. You don't want to go crazy with it. And you can see that I'm building up the dust already. Any weight you leave off the tail of an airplane is weight you don't have to add to the nose, which saves overall weight, and the tail's much more powerful than that. Let's try a little rougher sandpaper here. We also are going to benefit by smoothing these down a little bit, because that will give us a little bit less drag. But we don't want to go crazy. We don't want to round the leading edges. That's a long story, but very thin, flat airfoils like this seem to like square leading edges a little bit better. So that's what we're going to do. Use that rougher stuff on here real quick. And just by removing some of this material, we're saving a little bit of weight. The sharper trailing edge is better for it aerodynamically. And we should be in business. Now let's just see if we made any difference. We'll use the wing as our support. You can see the numbers. Yeah, still half a gram. Didn't really save much. We could get more aggressive about that, but I think we don't need to in this case because we have nice light ones. Up to you. That's an important part of the building process. Let's see how our tackiness is going here. Not really experienced with tacky glue, so we're learning together. I think I'm going to want a little bit more of that stuff. Get soaked into the wood just a smidge. Let's try that now. Might have underdone it just a hair. That looks better. Okay, we want to set this aside to dry. Put this over here. It's out of the way. And we also want to go ahead and build our tail feathers. We want these to be nice and square. So we have this little device. Which fits down over there, and then that sits flat on it, and it keeps this up and down like that. Now ideally you don't want to glue this to the tail while you do it, because that would obviously be embarrassing. Note also that we want this to fit in this tab straight. That makes the rudder initial setting as straight as we can get it. Now just for funsies, I'm going to go ahead and do this with super glue. And I would not use the thinnest super glue you have, because it will grab it when you don't want it. Put that in there, put that on there. Make sure that's square. And we'll just take that off. And let that set for a second. And because it's super glue, we can see that we've got a nice straight tail. And we'll let that finish gluing off camera. So those are things that we need to do. Let those glue things dry. If you're using Elmer's glue for that process, then of course you want to let that dry for a while. So while all those things are going on, we're going to go ahead and start working on our wing. Now the wing is flat. We don't want it to be flat. We want it to be airfoil shaped. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut this material off. And you can just barely see it. There's a faint little line here that kind of marks the high point of the wing. And we're going to kind of shave this down so it's a wedge shape, and then roughly shave this down so that it's got the curve shape we want, and then we'll use this template to sand the rest of the wing down. Now there's a couple ways to cut this down. You could use a razor blade or a hobby knife to kind of whittle it off. That works fine. It takes a little bit of practice, but you can do it. You just, as you take each chunk off, you just kind of slowly wedge it back. You just want to be careful to go a little bit at a time. You can also use a big wood plane like this. This one's a little large, but you can see that it does work to take those chunks off of there. Or we've got a little custom built one that we've whipped up for the purpose. And in order to know that how far we've gone along, what I like to do, and we put this in the instructions, is we'll just put a light mark on here so that we can see as we go along. My other pen is a little healthier than that. How much material we've taken off. You know, as we shave it off, all these ink marks are going to come off, and that allows us to see where we've done work, because you know it could be hard to tell. So we'll just whittle our way along here, and just like with the hobby knife, you want to work the trailing edge first. With material this thin, a plane like this likes to work at the sharpest angles. So that's why we want to kind of start at the trailing edge all the way along and work our way back. And it's not always easy. I mean, sometimes you're like, it gets caught. If you adjust the blade wrong, it wants to wedge its way in there. But you do eventually work this down. There we go, and that's a nice cut. The trick is to kind of keep producing a new high point for the blade to dig into. When it's flat, it doesn't have as much to catch on. Sometimes it's a good idea to switch directions. And work your way along. And you can see as we go that we're taking these witness marks off of here. It's these shallower parts that are where it starts to get a little more challenging. Take a stab at it with the X-Acto knife for contrast, just so we see. But you can see at the shallower parts, it's just as hard with the X-Acto knife. If you've got a certain amount of skill with this, you know, I've been doing this for a long time, you can control it, but you do have to be careful because you don't want to slice all the way through there. The advantage of this, you could just sand this, and the advantage of this, of course, is that you're making big chunks that are not making a bunch of dust, and that significantly improves the cleanliness of your shop. And sanding takes a long time because, you know, there's a lot of material to take off. I mean, we're taking off 1/8 of an inch. In fact, I should have mentioned this earlier. One thing we can do to help save weight on this is we take this thing and we can just knock a big chunk off of it right now. just thin this down a little bit. I mean, nominally it's 1/8 of an inch thick. Of course, that varies a little bit depending on the material we get, and so taking some of this off will help save weight in the long run. And later on we'll paint it or spray it with a little bit of sanding sealer, just enough to keep the pores full so that it doesn't want to warp too much. Okay, I'm kind of curious, have we affected the weight yet? Let's have a look-see. Already making a little dust. We are at 0 grams. So this went already down to 6.8 grams. So we've already taken off more than half a gram just by that little bit and sanding the wing down. So that's great. That's going to really help this airplane fly better. Well, this thing is probably going to want just a hair bit more adjustment. Got to be careful when you're doing this because the blade wants to cut more sharply, more deeply when it's a exposed edge, and then use my pocket knife as a screwdriver. Give this just a teensy-weensy bit more bite. Here it doesn't need so much bite, it's easy for it to dig in, but when it's up here, it becomes a little more challenging. There we go. Going at this at a little bit of an angle seems to be helping out. Yeah, that's what we like. Here's a nice good cut. And you can see we're making progress already. And we're 20 minutes into this, you know, it's like, this is something that takes a little bit of time, but you know what you're going to get at the end of this is an airplane. What do you get at the end of 20 minutes of watching TV? You watch the show, right? You don't really have anything to show for it, I guess is what I'm saying. Well, you get a show for it, right? Let's try this blade angle. Sometimes you just got to experiment a little bit as you go along. Make sure that it's clean, because again, if we set this too deeply, it'll end up gouging it, and we don't want to do that. But the flatter we get, of course, the deeper the blade needs to be in order to make contact. See if we can work anything like this. I mean, all a plane really is a tool for holding your knife blade at the angle you want to keep it at. Gonna add just a weensy bit more. There are nicer razor planes in the world too, but small ones are difficult to come by and they're expensive. And we're not trying to get you to spend $1 million on woodworking tools. Not that we think woodworking tools are a bad idea, but you know, we want to make it as easy as possible for you to have an airplane. Now we've got to be careful as we get up here. You can barely see this line. It's not very, a little bit faint, maybe hard to see on the screen, but this is where the airfoil is the maximum thickness. We basically want to keep this line. So we shave off all this ink, but we want to keep this line as we go so we don't make the airfoil too thin. To go back down here and take a little bit more off. Nominally, there's a NASA term, right? Nominally. The ideal situation is that this trailing edge is very, very thin. The airflow loves that. You can make it so thin that it's not very strong, and it's, you know, won't take dings and stuff. So instructions say, you know, leave this to about a 1/16 of an inch. You can go thinner than that. A 32nd of an inch is fine. You just don't want to gouge it so far that you start taking little nibbles out of the back end and it looks like a mouse or something has been eating on it. But as we go, kind of need that thinness. We're getting pretty close here, so that we have that edge. Ooh, that's a bit of a gouge. Yeah, I think we'll be right. And you can see the witness marks, and we're working our way forwards. Get our template out here. This is basically a straight line. Not quite, but close enough. And that's what we're going for, is kind of a straight line. You can see this high point here. We're trying to cut this down and move it forward towards the high point on the wing. And it's got to be a sharp enough angle that this thing will cut on it. That's the trick. That's why we keep going back to the trailing edge. And working it forwards. Got to be careful though, because we've tightened this up a little bit, so it's going to take a little deeper bite. If you do get a gouge, not the end of the world. The airplane will still fly. But as we go, you know, you could, in theory, fill it back in with like plastic wood or some kind of filler. But generally speaking, we're going to have left enough material here that by the time we sand it, it's not going to be an issue, because the sanding will take out most of any gouge that we get. Getting there. This is the part where I'll probably edit the video, so you don't sit there and watch me do this. But maybe not. Maybe you want to spend half an hour listening to me ramble as we go. How this feels on the blade. This blade isn't really wide enough, that's why it's not as good for cutting these things. Actually, get a little bit more witness mark here, don't we? I'm starting to lose track of where we are. I'm going to add a little bit up here. Very shallow angle, so it's making the blade a little tougher. I guess we're gonna tighten this up just a widge more. Widge? Smidge? Bit? There we go. Cut very thin. That's what you want to see, paper thin. I'm not trying to take the whole world off here. And this high point gets to be hard because it's pretty flat, and the blade has to be pretty aggressive to get at it. Take a little break here. Let's work on the front leading edge. Now, leading edge is only from here to here, so we got to go back to this nice, easy to cut, sharp corner. But we have to be careful because we got the blade set a little deeper. And we don't need to go back quite so far. Also taking kind of a steeper cut at this. And we don't want this to become a razor edge either. It actually likes a little bit of a blunt leading edge. You can fool with that to adjust it, but these airfoils need what's called a trip. And the square leading edge seems to work pretty well as a trip. So we don't want to go all the way down to the table with that. Try cutting the other side for a little bit. Digging in a little bit there. Sometimes if you get it hung up, it's a good idea to go back to it from the opposite side to kind of help that along. Sometimes holding it off the table is a good idea too, because it gives you some room to change the angle of the blade relative to the table. So out here, it's not, it's going to be supported off of it and won't want to cut. And you can see the line here just barely. Likes to dig in right there. See this smooth curve out here with the leading edge, and get our template again. See that okay? And it's starting to look like an airfoil now. We're getting a lot closer. So let's take another stab at this high point here, see if we can bring this back just a little bit more. Save ourselves a little bit of sanding. See the clock, we're 30 minutes in. Gets a little messy. Little broom, one of those little vacuum cleaners, that's nice, but obviously you can just sweep it onto a trash can. There we go. Found the sweet spot. Shallow angles working best right this second to kind of on the spot where it wants to cut. Ooh, a little bit too much. Alright, I think that's about as far as I feel like going. But you can see we got it pretty darn close. So that took us half an hour, but that is the bulk of the airfoil. That's almost usable right there. So let's see how good a job we did with this, our tacky glue. And I'm going to use an old single edge razor blade for this part because we are cutting sandpaper, and that's rough on X-Acto blades. Given the choice, I would rather mess up an old single edge razor blade and a brand new X-Acto blade. That's not perfect, but we'll give her a go. If not, we can do the cooking show thing, and I've got one already pre-made. We can do that. So this could have stood a little longer time for the glue to dry. If in doubt, always let the glue dry longer. Oops. See if that still is going to work. Pulled it off of there. Oh, I took some of the sandpaper off too. I have to scooch that over, but not a big deal. Alright, let's see how well this works. Live TV, folks. So the idea here is that you want to cut the, not your thumb, you want to cut the wing with this as close to the leading edge as you can. So obviously this is only the same size as the wing in the middle. We'll just keep the leading edge along here because this back part is basically flat and it doesn't really matter. And we'll kind of follow this leading edge along. So you just hold this thing and start working back and forth. Oh, before we do that, let's see how much weight we saved. .5 grams. So we've taken 2 grams off of here. What was it before? It was 7.8. And now we're down to 5.5. We'll call it shaped. So we've taken 2 grams off. That's huge. I mean, that's 20% of what the whole airplane weighed before. So we've made significant progress in improving our wing. So since we did a pretty good job of that, we probably won't need to sand a lot off of this. This is now mostly about final shaping it. And you can see it's cutting. So we did a pretty good job here. You know, that's why we use the coarse sandpaper to get it shaped. Oops. Well, there you go. Well, I'm gonna have to use my pre-made one. Sorry about that. Not quite fully accurate to reality, but if I let that glue dry a little longer, we'd be in better shape. You want to work these wingtips because they tend to end up a little thicker because they're a little harder to cut. And making the wingtips a little bit lighter is ultimately a good idea. Saves weight. The wing doesn't need to be very strong out here because all the strength has to be in the middle. And it means that the airplane resists less when it tries to turn. It recovers from bumps better. All that kind of stuff. So starting to look like an airfoil or sort of non-sandpaper one. That looks pretty darn good. See that? A little bit thick back here. You can see it's like that. So we might want to work on that with the sanding block. That's another nice thing is this part, since it's basically flat, we can work it over with the sanding block. And that goes quickly. We don't want to leave a notch, but if we have a little hump back here, which we sometimes do because it's hard to cut that part, we can do that. Let's work on the other wingtip. Again, trying to keep this close to the leading edge. Now this is all blocky from our previous cutting, from the way we cut it. We just want to let this round part round off those high spots. You gotta be a little bit careful because it's easy to slide back and you end up with a little bit of a chunk there. This one's a little bit thicker than the other one, so I'll have to work on this a bit. If we need to, we can carve it down again. Making them even Steven is nice. Not sure where that term comes from, but you can see we're getting a pretty nice airfoil out of that. Oops, why did the clock stop? Oh no. Well, lost track of time. I'll have to figure that out. Sorry about that. Must have bumped it. Still, we got a little bit of a notch right there, or a rough spot right there. We can peek at our camera. It says we've been going 41 minutes. And you can just kind of follow this corner and use the leading edge template to round this off a bit. Give you a nice, comfortable leading edge. That'll help take that chunk out of there. Give us some taper. For the purposes of dihedral, you'd actually like any taper to be on the bottom side rather than the top, but that's a little hard to do with the way we're doing it. So now you can see how we have a nice rounded top and bottom side there. So we're making progress. Oops. The real goal, of course, is that we want as much as possible with airfoil to match this template. So I can look at this one and get our template out. Where'd it go? There it is. Look at it in the middle. That's looking pretty nice. Look at it on the tip. That's looking pretty nice on the other tip. This part looks a little rough right here. Now this is rough sandpaper. We're making rough cuts, and so what we're going to do is we're going to take a light sanding block, and this isn't meant to shape or cut. This is just intended to give you a smoother surface, and eventually we can hand sand it. And, you know, a lot of the time you don't want to use handheld sandpaper because your fingers will make a divot, but for the final sanding it's often convenient. All right, that's looking good. We'll take a little break here.